evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
89.3 Mahoning Drive-In Radio, your old friend Virgil back once again for another exciting episode of the podcast. It's been too long. Joined as always as my co-host and general manager extraordinaire, Mark. Say hello, Mark.
Hello, Mark.
And guys, we got Jeff back. Say hello, Jeff.
Hello, Jeff.
I was waiting for it. Set it right up. As you guys know, the only podcast dedicated to the love and revival of our beloved drive-in culture. And we've just come in for a landing on our epic 2022 season. And guys, what a ride, hasn't it? It feels like this year more than any other went by really fast. For you?
It did. Yeah.
I always say right when I feel like I'm getting the hang of things and hitting a good rhythm, it's October and it's over.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That was the case we were just talking about before we started recording, how the Patreon's been clicking up, and I'm sure it's because we've been talking about it and people are spreading the word that, hey, this doesn't have to end in the off season. There's a way to keep your finger on the pulse of what the Mahoning is doing, what they're planning. And we are planning some madness, as always, a lot of things to stay tuned for. But today we're just going to kind of go over, do a recap. And since we got Jeff, I know there's some questions that we saved that the fans have been sending in. So it'll be a good time to hit those. So, but before we jump in, any highlights for the season for you guys as we've come in for landing, whether it's choice moments or events?
The only thing I can think of is I was amazed at how smoothly it went. I was able to pay more attention this year because Mike and Robert were kind enough to run the film, so I could sit down at my desk and just watch everything that went on around me. And what I enjoyed the fact was it just went so smoothly. Anybody had a problem, they knew who to talk to, or they came to talk to me or whoever. I just loved the fact that it went so smoothly this year.
Yeah, we didn't have that drama, any of the madness. You know, obviously it always comes with the hurdles and the madness, but it is a situation where the teamwork really clicked this year. And maybe that's the idea of it moving by so quickly, is that we were able to find our groove, which we knew coming out of the pandemic that was going to be the case. But I keep thinking about it because I've been watching Batman 66 with Virgie again now in the off season. But that Batman event was so much fun, having the Batmobile there. That is that standout. It's a shame we got weather, but that was a great fan event.
It still worked out good, and that's what I mean. When we have something against us like the weather, we all know what to do. And I was just really amazed. I was just really pleased.
Yeah. How about you, Mark? Anything stand out in a good way?
For me, there were so many. It's really a blur when it gets to the end of the season, because I think you mentioned it in one of our internal chats. How many events or films did we show this last season, roughly?
We showed exactly 200, but it doesn't include all the features, all the films that ran through the projector. But those are the ones that were publicized. As you know, we do the Patreon screenings, and those toward the end we were doing triple features for. So if you include all those, the idea of running 200 films over 6 months is a huge undertaking for any business, let alone one that is still very bare bones as far as the team that runs it. Yeah, even looking back on it, it's like, how do I even put my head on it?
It's crazy because you think about the drive-in format is generally concentrates on weekends, and it's usually the same movies for weeks at a time because of their popularity or the studio contracts for you. If you want to get the new Marvel movie, you have to have it for between like 2 and 4 weeks. So for us, we don't go by that model. And every night, just about every night, we didn't do a lot of weekends where it was the same movies 2 nights in a row this year.
No, we didn't.
And that's always something we talk about when booking a weekend is, do we do the same program 2 nights? Do we do 2 different movies each night? And there's a lot to weigh there. It's like if you showed the same movies both nights, it theoretically gives more people a chance to catch it over those 2 days. But if you do 2 different movies each night, you might get those people to stay all weekend, or you might get more people to come out for a weekend who are traveling, who might want to do that. It's kind of an odd thing. So when I think about the last year, there was so much that we did. I have to look at a list of them, and I forgot half of what we did. I mean, I loved we might have talked about this already. I love the James Bond night because I'm a huge Bond fan, and our friend Hank brought out some of his original Bond memorabilia for display. I love the Monkeys night because that's very, very close to my heart. Zombie Fest is always fun, and we had the French film documentary crew there. And we finally now, as we speak, we've actually been able to see this French film documentary called, that translates to Under the Stars. It's like a 50-minute documentary that profiles 6 different drive-ins in the US that will be coming to HBO Max in America in 2023. So people will be able to see us on the big small screen or the small big screen. And that was pretty amazing to have them there and be dressed up as a zombie covered in fake blood while Chud is playing on the big screen. And there was so much. It's hard for me to pinpoint just 1 or 2 things. And I've probably forgotten as much as I can remember about it.
It was a wave of a season that kind of washed over us, but that idea of playing the same films over the weekend is something that we tried out over 4th of July weekend. We did most of our year in a traditional way where we had a couple of weekends that carried over. But it's what we saw, at least early in the season, is those Fridays really did suffer because we had the same movie on Saturday. And I recall for sure the Mary Poppins night, even The Fly. The Fly did really well that second weekend. But it's one of those things that you may be able to literally double the audience if you do it, but that also sometimes doubles or more the overhead. So I think that's the balance, and I think the trick for next year is finding a way to relieve some of the overhead, whether that's bringing people in, getting creative, however it is. So I'm really looking forward to next year because this year was a learning lesson, and then we get to put some of those lessons in place for next year.
Yeah, I think every year we refine our style, so to speak. We learn something every year and then we apply it next year. And that's what we do so well.
Yeah. And on that note, we are always trying to keep our business the best that it can be. And in the off season, when it comes to the planning, when it comes to what we do in the off season, that's really where our heads are at. Is we have become a true mecca and beacon for film fans across the world, and we don't take that lightly. So having that support really does fuel our fire with what we want to unveil on you guys. But on the booking side, I can say, we've had great success with guests, and whenever people catch me on the lot or catch you guys, I'm sure on the lot, a lot of those questions are, what are the plans for guests next year? What do you guys want to do? And I think just like this year, trying to align ourselves with folks that are known for being mouthpieces for the drive-in culture or are responsible for some of those big films in our drive-in culture that you can point at is certainly going to be a push. And maybe I'm just saying that now because we're focusing on the early season and going for something really big. So again, I feel like this podcast is a tease, but there's a lot to stay tuned for and keep coming back for.
Try our delicious pizza. It's ready and piping hot at the Refreshment Center now.
Behind the blazing eyes of X, you will see demon forces that seek to probe the scientific unknown. Beware. Beware the stare of X. 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 1 cc under the right lid, 1 cc under the left. Suddenly he possessed X-ray vision, power to see through clothes, flesh, walls to the very ends of the universe. X, a fantastic adventure into the unknown, starring Ray Milland in his most challenging role since his Academy Award-winning Lost Weekend. X, the motion picture with a theme so unique it could only be called X, filmed in Pathé Color and Spectrorama. X, the man with the X-ray eyes, is the different picture this year from American International. You won't ever forget it. X. X. X.
Mark, what do you got as far as stuff on the docket for today's episode?
Well, I had a couple of questions that I had, some notes I had taken from previous conversations we've had that I wanted to ask Jeff about some of, well, speaking of reflecting back on the season. So we are dealing with week to week, a 73, I believe, year old theater as we speak. And most of the equipment, it's not that old, but it's not, we're not working with state of the art stuff in maintaining a vintage drive-in theater running 35 millimeter. And there was one night, what was the film that was running? We had the sound go out. Do we recall what show that was?
It was Frankenstein. It was Universal Monsters, and I want to say it was Frankenstein.
I believe it was Universal Monster Mash weekend, and it was not very far into a film. Michael was projecting, and there was a changeover, and suddenly movie one. Suddenly somebody says there's no sound. Now, a lot of those early Universal films like Frankenstein and Dracula, there are long stretches of quiet in those movies. Sometimes they're still utilizing the technique of silent cinema, and occasionally somebody talks. So it didn't occur to us until somebody came out and said there was no sound. And we looked at things, we couldn't figure out what it was. And then it was determined that, I believe, circuit board had blown in the, what was the piece of equipment?
The Starscope, which is the audio processor.
And do you know what vintage that Starscope is? Because if you've ever seen it, the font looks like it's the Star Wars font. So it's clearly like a post-1977 thing.
Yeah, those are from the early 80s.
And what was it that you determined had gone wrong with that? You said it was a circuit board, and suddenly we're all like, well, how long are we without sound? Luckily, Virgil, we always have a Blu-ray backup of everything in case anything goes wrong. So Virgil was able to pretty quickly, with Dave Wirt's help, switch over and continue the film digitally while we looked at this. And internally, we're like, how long are we going to be without sound? How long are we going to have to be digital? We can't run film with only one projector that has sound. When can we get a tech out? And then you sort of realized something.
Yes. Years ago, I had gotten parts from another Starscope circuit boards. And I put them in my bottom desk drawer thinking, well, maybe someday, if something happens, I've got a spare couple of boards. And when the sound went out this year, I had forgotten that. It was so many years ago, and I thought, I'm going to have to get a tech out here. Like you just said, Mark, could take a couple of days. What if we can't run? What if we don't have sound next week? And I'm sitting there thinking of all these terrible things, and all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, I've got some spare circuit boards in the bottom of my left-hand desk drawer. I wonder if they're still there. So I looked, and there they were. And I thought the way it was behaving, it was probably the power board, the main power board. That's what it seemed like to me. And I thought, I'll bet my luck I don't have a power board, just some of the other boards, because there's like 8 different ones inside that thing. So I'm going through the board, son of a gun, there's a spare power board. I'm like, oh, this is great. So I thought, man, I hope this is it, because you just don't know until you try it, because I don't have any testing equipment. So I pulled out the old power board, took the front off of it, pulled out the old power board, stuck the one in there that was in my desk drawer, hit power, and son of a gun, it worked beautifully. It worked beautifully.
But that wasn't before you had to take sandpaper and it wouldn't slide, it wouldn't slide into the slot easily. Like you could see it was the same board, it just wouldn't fit. So there's this like not furious, there's very deliberate sanding of the top and the bottom to try to make it a little narrower, and it didn't quite fit. So it was a couple of times with that, and then it slid right in, and suddenly we were back in. So how long were we down? One movie and a half?
No, just one movie.
Just the first movie.
Yeah, at that intermission, you guys were able to do some sort of tests right after I got off screen. And I literally was like, you guys are pulling my leg, because you called for me and was like, we got sound. I was like, no, because I thought it was going to be a situation where we had to call in a tech, and the way that our 35 millimeter tech situation is, I knew it would at least be a day. Nobody's close to the Mahoning, certainly not the tech. It was one of those saves the day moments, and one of those things where we really did not know what to do. Like, had no idea, A, what had gone wrong with the equipment, and B, even if we found that replacement, how would we get that in there? No, and it's a perfect example of, your knowledge and know-how with the equipment that really, it more times than once this year, has saved the day. So that was definitely a Yahoo moment. And one that I wish we would have documented. It would have been a perfect like documentary moment to be like, first night of Universal Monsters, everybody's hyped up for the 35 and then
Yep. Well, it goes along with the education you get. I mean, years ago in the state of Pennsylvania, you had to be a licensed projectionist. You had to have a license, which means you had to know certain things about repairs and putting stuff back together, even if you don't have any parts. You have to try to get it to work. And so that's part of the education, that and the fact that I did have a spare power board. If not, we would have been back to the tech situation. But I did have a spare. And now our tech took the one that had blown out and he's rebuilding it. So then we'll have a spare again.
Wonderful. That's great. And we get that a lot. We get people who will show up at the theater, whether they're connected in some way as a fan or in the drive-in industry, a theater industry, and bring pieces and parts. Even if we don't need them, they'll be like, hey, here you go. I don't have any use for this sound head or whatever it is. So they'll bring it in and we'll kind of assess and be like, is this for us? So yeah, it's nice to have those backup parts. And that was a perfect example there.
Absolutely.
Speaking of things going wrong, not that we want to speak of things going wrong, I had another Jeff question, because your experience in this is so much, longer than ours and more varied. There have been times at the Mahoning, not very often, where the power might flicker, where there's, a severe windstorm or rainstorm or something like that. And I remember working the cash register once and the power kind of went off and came back on and everybody kind of had a lump in their throat. I wanted to know if you had ever had an experience at other drive-ins or at the Mahoning where the power went out for a period of time and how you handled that, or did you ever have a situation where the power didn't come back on?
No, it always came back on. I'd say the longest time at the Mahoning was out for about an hour and a half. There was no power. And I thought somebody probably accidentally hit a telephone pole somewhere, because there were no storms in the area or anything like that. Power just died. I mean, God forbid anybody got hurt, but the only thing I could figure, okay, something took out a telephone pole somewhere. So an hour and a half went by, and sure, we lost a few people, a couple people left, but the majority of the people were willing to stay and see if it would come back on sometime, within a reasonable amount of time anyway. And about an hour and a half later, all of a sudden the lights came back on, because the problem is you go around, you turn everything back off again, then you don't know where the power comes back on because you have everything off. So we just left everything the way it was. And all of a sudden, hour and a half later, the concession lights come on, everything fires back up, and we were ready to roll again. But I'd say that hour and a half, after an hour and a half, I was getting to the point where I think we better call it a night and just send people home. And then all of a sudden, there it was.
Wow.
Needless to say, the night went a lot longer than what was planned because of the hour and a half delay, but we just picked up where we left off. And that said, the majority of the people stayed. How
did you announce to everyone to stay? Because you wouldn't have had the radio at that point. Did you just yell really? Well, if you yelled at the screen, everyone would hear it.
Right. I just opened the booth door, yelled at the screen, "Attention, everybody!" But no, seriously, most people came to the concession stand because they wanted to know what was going on. They're sitting in their cars, all of a sudden, no picture, no sound. Most people got out of their cars and just drifted into the concession. Hey, what's going on? And they could tell there were no lights. The place was dark. So, they knew that we had lost power. But, yeah, that's about it. And we still told the people, hey, if you want to wait with us, we'll wait for a while. We'll see what happens. And most people did.
It's crazy. Yeah, the only time that we had that, at least in our run together, was that Bill Moseley event, which is probably what Mark's talking about when he was at the register.
It was the last night of the season 2 years ago.
Yeah, and it was, oh my God, it was nuts. We have our vendor tents outside, and those things were whipping, like rocking and rolling. I remember at a certain point, me and Carl were out there trying to hold those puppies down, making sure that they were all set. But yeah, the power flickered. It wasn't during the movie though, so it was pre-show while Bill was signing. He was cool as a cucumber though. You can tell he was a pro. He's like, whatever, the power goes off, we got points. We'll make this work.
And I did have one other question. You had mentioned a while ago in one of our conversations, we were talking about, one of the staples of drive-ins. What do you have to deal with at a drive-in? You have to deal with the rain, and they made drizzle guards. And occasionally you have to deal with the cold as the year goes on. And for a while, drive-ins had in-car heaters. That's something I've never experienced anywhere. But you had said at the highway drive-in, they had in-car heaters. Now, when was this? Like, how did they work?
They're on each speaker pole, there was a special socket where you would plug the heater in. And they would give you one at the stand. I don't know if they took a deposit or if they kept your driver's license so that you would bring it back, something like that. But they would lend them out to you. And then on the pole where you got your speaker from, there was a socket that these plugged into. And then you could put them in your car and turn them on, and they would heat the car up. They were electric heaters, obviously. And they did pretty well because they were 208 volts, which is weird. Usually you think, okay, it's either 120 or it's 220. These were 208 volts, and that was so you couldn't take them home as souvenirs. They wouldn't work.
That's so
120
smart.
isn't enough. Yeah, 120 volts is too little, and 220 will burn them out. So they ran on 208 volts, and they had a special plug. And so they would only work at the drive-in.
It's crazy. What size were they? Were they like boombox sized? Were they like, because I've seen different models, and like the ones that I've seen were like cylinder in shape, and you know, you kind of held it like a boombox with like a handle at the top with a fat bottom.
Yes, that's about exactly what they looked like, the older ones, yes. And that's what we had at the highway. And you would take that in your car and put it on the floor, you know, or what they called the transmission hump that went between the front seats. You'd put it there.
Yeah.
So that the back seat people could get some heat. And they worked very well. And it's just one of those things. Not every drive-in had them, but the highway did.
Yeah, it seems like one of those things that's so of the time too, because now, as we see every night at the drive-in, cars aren't designed for the drive-in, and they're certainly not all designed the same way. So it seems like to have something like that where it's like this will work in almost any vehicle, it seems just crazy. Like, where would you even put it? You know, there's not enough room to put a thing in a console with all the gadgets they got now.
I know what you mean. Yeah, and of course at the Mahoning, the poles are gone. Some drive-ins are still fortunate enough to have their poles, but if they didn't have that 208 volt socket, you know, they can't use a heater there anyway. But they were a thing there for the time in the 50s and 60s, and the drive-ins that had them, they worked quite well. And they stopped using them basically because the underground wiring started going bad, just like why most drive-ins don't have their speaker poles. The underground wiring started to go bad and short out, and that was just the end of the system.
Yeah, we talked about it. This is a fun thing to talk about, but in the office / projection booth, right above Jeff's desk, there's a big old like console that has all these different numbers and lights and rows of switches. And I asked him the one day, like, what is this? Like, what did this control at a certain point? And you said it actually controlled what, row lights and speaker sound for each row?
Yeah, you had a switch for each row of speakers. So if you had a speaker short out in one row, it didn't take out the whole field. You could isolate that speaker. Now you would lose the rest of the row, but it wouldn't kill the whole field. If I turned off row 12, all the other rows would work. Or if you had a speaker short out in row 6 and it affected the whole field, you turn off row 6 and then everybody else gets their sound back. So it was a way to isolate what row had the bad speaker.
That's crazy. Imagine, you know, watching the movie, all of a sudden your sound goes out. But it again is one of those timely things. Like somebody at a certain point figured out, oh, you don't have to lose the whole entire lot. You can regulate it so they can at least move up a row or a row or two and be able to get their sound back.
Right.
Now with the row lights, how did that work? Was there lights on each side of the Mahoning lot, like one on the entry side where you come in and one on the exit side, or just entry?
Right. And if you remember, that's what we did this last year. Our good buddy Jeff Quinlan made exit signs for every row, which is the way it would have looked back in 49. You had an exit light at the end of every row lit up that people could see which way with an arrow to find the road out of the drive-in. And of course, over the years, they all got rusted away or demolished or whatever. So Jeff Quinlan made an exit sign for each row, put solar lights on them. And now next year, because you asked about the incoming lanes, the incoming rows also had a light at each row, just like the old one in the concession stand. It said row 9, and then underneath was a regular light or a red light. If the red light was on, it means the row was full. There was no room left. You had to go to another row. So you would turn those red lights on, and they were switched from in the booth. You would turn the red light on and turn the regular light off. And people knew it was full. Yeah. So what we want to do next year with Jeff Quinlan is he's going to make entrance lights for all the rows. So we'll have those again. Not quite like the original ones, but we'll have them.
Markers. I mean, that's the one thing with the bigger events that we do. We took it upon ourselves to start rebuilding the back of the lot that had become swamped and beaten down over the years and lost its humps. So once you get to the back of the entry side portion of the lot, you start to kind of lose where the actual roadways are. Now, we laid down gravel and built up the humps for that Joe Bob event. So now we have the roads back, but some of those definitely aren't as defined or as easy to follow as they would be having a row sign. And it's classic, you know, having that, bringing that back in this case to the Mahoning.
Yes, I can't wait till we get those done. That'll give us a light for each row on both sides of the row. And, you know, people stick on the main road, and when they see what row they want to go in, they just duck in and go that way. Right now, you drive all over the place, and there's nothing saying what road you're in or where you're at. They go drive over the humps, you know, right in front of people. It's crazy. So this will get it a little bit more defined when we put those lights in.
Yeah, that's great.
Guess what? Guess what would taste good right now to everyone in the car? Candy. We've got your favorite kind at the concession stand. Come on down and pick out the kinds you want to enjoy during the rest of the show. Be sure to get plenty because everyone likes candy, and our big variety is chosen to please everybody's taste.
Once this picture sinks its fangs into you, you will never be the same.
Touch your skin, it's scaled.
Look for your legs, they're gone.
Feel your body, it's cold.
Don't say it, hiss it.
Plus another spine-chilling hit, The Boy Who Cried Werewolf. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested.
Anything else we have on the projection side, Mark? I know you said you had some questions left over from either the Patreon or fan-sourced.
We do. Well, you know, I put the word out because I knew we'd be getting together, all three of us, for the first time in a while. And I asked our Patreon members if they had any questions or topics for us to discuss. And as always, they delivered voluminously. So, and they're always really great, thoughtful questions, better than the crap we'd come up with. So that's why I put it out to them. So I can go through some of these. John Dahl asks, inspired but not necessarily related to the recent good news about Shankweiler's, are there ideas that you have had that you thought wouldn't fit the Mahoning but could be interesting directions for other drive-ins to pursue? Most of our ideas are like what would work for us. Once in a while, something comes up and it's like, oh, that's really not a great fit for us for some reason.
Yeah, a lot of times it's tough because no drive-in does what the Mahoning does and what we do as far as the fan experience. But I'll certainly say it, like when the good new horror batch comes out every single year, I think about it on a booking level where I'm like, oh my goodness, if you were a first run theater, here's the no-brainer double, or here's what I would do, you know. But that's really playing with the deck of first run. I think there's really nothing that we don't do or we would kind of steer away from. Maybe some of the family friendly fare, but that's probably only because we're limited to how many of those we can do because we have only so many weekends and now only so many days on those weekends. So that's another big thing with expanding the amount of films that we play. We are approached by so many people that we want to make these events work. And the only time it really doesn't make sense to slim it down to one day now post-pandemic is if we are bringing a guest out and that guest has a big overhead or a big guarantee or something like that where you can spread that fan base out a little bit over 2 days. But, you know, getting back to the question, I would say rarely unless it's a first run situation.
about a year or so ago, I actually messaged the Skyview drive-in in Graz. It's a lovely drive-in. It was getting late in the season for them, and the then new Halloween, I think it might have been the second of the new Halloween movies, came out. And I suggested to them, you ought to run the original Halloween, followed by the 2018 Halloween, followed by Halloween Ends as a triple feature, because that's like the whole story. And you would pull in the retro crowd and the new crowd. So once in a while, I'll think of like ballyhoo gimmicky kind of things that would work great for a first run theater that totally doesn't apply to us, just because I'm always in the what kind of cool, wacky thing can we do mode. And maybe once in a while I will share it with somebody I know who runs a new drive-in, but I don't think we really focus much on anything that we wouldn't feasibly be able to do.
Now, we dream about certain things, but there's that we can't do. But if we can't do it, it probably wouldn't make sense for really any other drive-in to do it. I don't know about you guys, but I get jealous all the time of the new Bev getting the new releases on 35, or the other chains getting the 70 millimeter roadshow runs. That would be incredible, just to be able to be a showcase for 35 millimeter and have it be one of the only places that you can see it in the area.
You know, what's interesting, you bring up the roadshow thing. We ran the Hateful Eight in its roadshow form at Tarantino Fest, Tarantino A Go-Go this year. And I think it was Will who pointed out that one of our Patreon members and regulars at the drive-in, that we might have been the only drive-in to ever show that as the roadshow version, because I think most drive-ins were long not running film at that point.
That's very true.
It was a very limited engagement for indoor theaters. Most indoor theaters didn't show the roadshow version.
Yeah, I remember seeing that when definitely we were at the Mahoning. So yeah, that's wild to think of. And the nice thing is that because they are making, and certain directors are producing some of these films on 35 millimeter, it means that we can play them in years to come.
Yeah.
We saw it with one of our recent Patreon posts about what would you guys like to see us book next year. Somebody in Syracuse did the A24 Film 35 millimeter festival.
Right.
And, you know, to be able to bring some choice titles from A24, who dominates right now in the first run market. I look at it, what we do as everything we do is seeped in retro, but being able to work with certain entities and also still remain retro and touch into that retro cool mentality. Even when we first started working with Shudder, it was like, oh, this is modern and fresh, but we can play into it because their whole style is repertory stuff on their streaming platform.
William Sebastian asks that musical question: what happens to film you own that gets vinegar syndrome? Do you keep it, trash it, sell it to collectors? So this is totally a Jeff question there. If we have film in our holdings, and we have had this happen, that has vinegar syndrome, what do you do with it?
You put oil on it and make a salad.
That is a joke when somebody walks into the booth and there's some film that's been on the edge and it's like, wow, it smells like a salad in here.
No, there are some films that have the vinegar syndrome where even if it's fairly pronounced, the film hasn't really shrunk that much yet. So we can play it. And no, we won't get rid of it. We'll keep it as long as it's playable. And once it gets to the point where it shrinks too much that the sprocket holes don't line up with the sprockets anymore, or it's so wavy that it goes in and out of focus every couple of seconds, then it's time to get rid of it. And it's really no good to anybody. I mean, we could sell it to a collector, but nobody's really going to want it at that point. If he can't play it, what's the point? So we'll keep them until they don't play anymore, and then it's probably time for the trash.
We did a couple for the Patreon that Harry had given us that he knew were pretty much on their way out. And that's a plus of what we do, is that we work with so many collectors that they may have really, really choice prints that they know, like, hey, no, I'm not going to get another year out of this, or be able to get to a point where I can put it in a lineup of mine. So if you guys want to run it, you can run it and then dumpster it.
Pretty much. The two or three that we ran, I think all but one were in rather decent shape visibly on screen, but one did sort of breathe and waver quite a bit when you were watching it.
Exactly. And it's just a matter of drawing that line when you decide that it's no longer playable. The ones that Harry gave us, I remember him saying, he says, okay, these have a play or two left in them. They're not junk yet, but you'd probably be able to run them one or two more times. And we'll take them because that's great. Because, what if maybe we can get 5 more times out of them? There's just no telling.
We love Will too. Will is the fan who has the amazing tattoo, the Mahoning marquee and Gizmo riding in front of it. And Rico, he also did some great poster art for us this season.
I'm sorry, sir. This is a private mountain.
But I only wanted it.
This mountain is reserved for patrons of drive-in theaters.
But
it's a supply depot for all sorts of good things, which people can get at the snack bar, like soft drinks, hot dogs, good hot coffee, candy bars of all kinds, delicious popcorn, and refreshing ice cream treats.
But I am a patron of this drive-in.
Well, why didn't you say so? Be our guest.
Here's one from a family member, from Vince at Merch. Have you spoken before on your favorite drive-in ads or commercials? If not, what is a favorite ad you have shown at a drive-in and what makes it your favorite? So he's talking about the pre-show, the intermission snipes and things like that. Does anybody have a favorite?
Ooh, that's tough. I always liked the Martian. I don't know if we have it, but it's definitely one that we've shared on our socials. It's I think the premise is that Martians have landed on the drive-in lot and they are really taken with the concession stand.
They come from all around to visit our snack bar.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a really, really choice one. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I love I guess you'd say like the aesthetic of the art that was used during that era.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as the countdown clocks and things like that. I really love the moment in our countdown clock where the golfer,
yes,
the golfer goes in for the help to help the lady swing, and it's the perfectly timed boing,
and her eyes get a little bit wide. And it's 4 F-O-R-E.
Yes, 4.
That might be my favorite countdown, just because it's the one that my drive-in, the Claremont drive-in in New Hampshire, played as a kid. So every time I watched that was the highlight of the night for me, was seeing that little animated countdown.
To hear that boing, you're like, here it comes.
As an adult, it is now, yeah. And when I used to go to the Northfield drive-in in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, they ran that countdown. So that was hugely, that's been like a thread throughout my drive-in life, is that countdown. I love the Pick commercial. I love the one where it's a live action color, and in the back of a woman's head, and you hear a man go, "Hey mom," and she turns around and mouths, "Who, me?" Silhouette of the man and the woman in the car, like they're silhouetted about to eat a hot dog, and it just looks it looks kind of crude.
Suggestive.
Yeah, the classic swirl dater with funky fanfare playing behind it. I'm a sucker for that stuff. I used to buy those Something Weird videotapes that were just 2-hour compilations of that stuff, and I could just watch them all the time. So
I have the whole collection. I got it last Christmas.
Oh, I love it. I love it to death. Makes me hungry. Do you guys have specific favorites?
Well, my favorites are the ones that I brought with me from the Highway Drive-In, because those are the really old ones, like that animated one that Mark likes so much. All those came with me from the Highway because they were going to tear it down. I'm taking the intermission reels. I'm not going to let those go, down with the building. So I brought those with me when I left that company. And those are my favorites just because I was showing those when I was in my 20s. I was showing those ones, the exact same ones that we're running now. And it's just so long ago, and I'm glad they're still running. It's amazing that they're in one piece yet. But again, that's the care you have to take with this old film that gets brittle. Is very careful how you run it. And so far, I've got everyone I left with all those years ago, but they're still running. They're still in good enough condition we can run them.
That's beautiful. That reminds me, did we get a gift from the Ricos guys this year? Like a snipe or something from a countdown clock from somebody?
That was from Philmac.
Philmac, that was it.
From Justin Atkinson and Philmac, Robbie Mack at Philmac, who are working on the Let's All Go to the Lobby documentary about Philmac. They gave us some 35 that they still had in their holdings.
Yes. We love it.
Yeah, I think that's the 5-minute countdown clock they sent us, is the 5-minute one. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, all of them are 10 minutes except one. We have one 5-minute one in case it's slow in the stand or we have to get a move on. We have a 5-minute countdown clock. All the rest are 10 or 12.
Yeah, I know the guys Frankenstein won together this year. That's a lot of fun. I know that not only folks on the crew, on the actual paid crew, but folks within the family are always looking on eBay and auction sites and things like that to see if we can get snipes, because you never know. If you can get enough, you can truly put together a great intermission reel out of it.
Oh, I love that new intermission reel because it's wacky. But there's a film collection that we bought earlier in the year this year, and it came with dozens of vintage early 1970s 35 millimeter TV commercials. They were never intended to be shown in theaters. They were for TV. And in the boxes that they came in, they have the labels that say what shows they were intended for, like the air date. It was like Merv Griffin show on this date at this time, or Fat Albert show at this date at this time. And they threw some of those in there. So we've got old cereal commercials and old X-Lax commercials. And a lot of this stuff gets run into Patreon shows, but once in a while they get run into a regular show. And it's a treat to see something that was never ever made to be seen for more than probably a few weeks ever on the big screen, looking like it was shot yesterday.
And a time cap. Talk about going back in time. Yeah. I love that Chex Mix commercial that we got and all that fun stuff.
Tom Bafolco asks, with this past Freddy Fest being the final run of that particular event, what are your philosophies in terms of rotating themed events, putting some into hibernation and reviving events from years past?
The final nightmare. Yeah, so many people were so concerned. Like, you're not doing Freddy Fest anymore? Are you insane? It's like, no, we're not that crazy. We're going to bring it back. We've built a brand at this point. And it's really hard because I think people see us stick with annuals. So when we put something to rest, it's like, oh no, is that not working anymore? Is that in trouble? Because we're going on like, what, year 10 of Camp Blood and Zombie Fest, or 9, whatever it is. So it's not I think, deliberate decision. Well, this one was a deliberate decision. So we have another franchise in mind that we're going to try to jump to. We as in Exhumed and the Mahoning, that we're going to try to jump to and give a little love to in October. Freddy Fest works insanely well. There wasn't a year that Freddy Fest didn't do well. So it really doesn't make sense for us to just cut it off the calendar. But especially with Harry's events, he has to pick and choose because he only has a certain number of weekends, even more limited than what we have. So now that weekend, and I can speak to this, now that weekend has become very guest heavy. Gosh, what did we have this year, guys? Not eight guests, I think, for this year's Freddy Fest. It was pretty crazy. But there is a big pull for multiple franchises that we don't do fan events for. So the thought with at least that weekend is that we're going to use that spot to jump into another big fan event. So trying to think of ones that got the chopping block. Maybe you guys can remember better than I.
Annual events that we don't do anymore?
Yeah, there's a lot of things we tried and then we didn't do, but things that like we did a bunch of and then stopped doing. We're good at sticking with stuff.
I know. I can't honestly think of anything right now.
Yeah, I think our big thing and what our secret of our success is planting the seed with events and letting them grow. You know, even this year, we had several events that certainly weren't what we call bangers in the biz, but it planted a seed for something really special for the future if the cards can align. So I can think of at least 3 instances there where it sets it up for next year to really come in and hone that platform that we started, you know, or set the stage this year and really come and bring it next year.
Agree.
There was Mighty Joe Young, the creature from the Black Lagoon, King Kong, and now there is Wanji. Wanji, born 50 million years ago and bursting from the bowels of the earth today to terrorize the West. Wanji, the most mammoth monster of them all, terrifying survivor of a lost era, rampaging through a forbidden land, a land they call the Valley of Wanji. Call it amazing, fantastic, unbelievable, and call it the greatest monster movie ever. The Valley of Guanji, the strangest Western roundup ever, starring James Franciscus, Gila Golan, and Richard Carlson. From Warner Brothers 7 Arts, in exciting Dynamation and Technicolor. The Valley of Guanji is rated G, spectacular entertainment for the whole family.
Here's a thoughtful question. Donnie asks, considering drive-in theaters have existed less than 100 years and more close every year, do you think there will be a time in the next 100 years when rising costs across the board and generational indifference toward the experience will lead to the complete end of drive-in culture? Screw that. That's my aside. I would love nothing more than to believe Joe Bob Briggs when he says the drive-in will never die, but so many things I never thought would disappear in my lifetime have already gone, and I do worry that future generations will only learn about the drive-in from books and old movies. I don't foresee them as ever totally going away, personally.
This would have been a great question in like 1980, you know. It started really crashing down. It's like, how can they possibly survive, you know? The era of cable and VHS. Like, who wants to go to the movies anymore? Who wants to do that? But guess what? We came back. We bounced back. We found a way to come back. And same thing when the pandemic came in. Same thing that the first run are dealing with right now. It's like there's no product. There's no, you know, nobody wants to come streaming everything, this and that. Guess what? They dealt with the same thing during the era of cable and the era of the video store. And they held strong, and the power of film and movie going won out. And I think as long as there's movies, hey, even if somehow there weren't movies, there will always be a platform for people to, or a need for people to want to get together and see movies.
And that's the drive-in is, to me, since I've rediscovered the drive-in in you know, the more recent decades, it's as much of a social thing as it is watching a movie. That's why I love to get there early. That's what we are for so many people. It's a place where we can provide you with a great time, and you could leave before the movies even start and still feel like you had your money's worth and had a great time. It's so much more than just watching movies, at least with us. And I think people do want to get out of the house and they want to have a communal activity, even though the drive-in is as communal as you personally want it to be. You could go and you never get out of your car. You could go to the snack bar, get food, sit in your car, never talk to anybody and have a great time. Or you could, you know, socialize and carouse. So I don't think it will ever go away. We are seeing a lot close right now, and we're seeing some open. So I think the numbers will probably continue to dwindle, but I think there'll always be an amount.
And there'll always be staples and beacons and meccas, you know, because of places like Mahoning and others across the country that have the history, have the story, have the preservation angle. And it is, if you're a fan of the Mahoning, you know how important it is to preserve something that you love. So I think that echoes across every single state, every single township, every single place that ever had a drive-in, without a doubt.
I agree with you guys. I think there will always be one or two here and there that will close out of the blue, either because they're not making enough money to pay the overhead anymore, or because an elderly person in the family owns it and they pass away and the kids aren't interested. So then it goes down the tubes. I think that's always going to take place at certain times. But I also think ones like ours, good Lord willing, where everybody loves the place and everybody wants to see it survive, I think there are those like us that will be around for, I'm hoping, more than 100 years, long after I'm dead.
We say it, you know, often, where it's like we're setting this up so the next generation can run it.
Yep.
Fans that come with their kids say, my kid can't wait until they're, you know, whatever age to be able to work here. And that gives us confidence to know that there is that love for this place and that appeal to keep it alive, that the experience and experiences that we're giving now are going to feed into its future, and people are going to have every reason to love and preserve it.
Right.
Bring your kids to the drive-in. Give them a taste.
That's right.
We got a lot of really good kids/family fan events. It's always tough because I think the world has gone retro, and that certainly crosses over into parenting. I see it right now. You know, I would much rather share something with my child that I am familiar with as well, And there's many an instance where instead of watching the new release, we go for something that's classic. And I know, or we know, is a stone cold classic, at least in our minds. So it gives us confidence knowing that we can book 80s classics, 90s classics, and get parents wanting to bring their kids out for it. So
I love that we can book 1930s classics. And we get one of the biggest age spans. You wouldn't believe the number of kids and teenagers who show up for movies damn near 100 years old. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Universal Monsters. I wish other genres from the 30s did as well for us, but
you never know. Never know. Could have that resurgence.
Those 30s British dramas are just raking it in for us lately.
Parents feel very confident bringing their kids to experience classic films. You know, it's not a thing where it's like, every time we do this, nobody ever they would want us to do it more often, for sure. So we're going to try to appease that audience as much as possible. I can't wait to unveil some of this stuff.
Borg 9, right?
Borg 9.
Once in a while, somebody will say something and they'll be like, this would be a good one for that Ernest Borgnine weekend. And I'm like, you laugh. The man had a great filmography. It would not be hard to do.
Hi, I'm Chili Dilly, the personality pickle. Packed in a jar for the freshest flavor. Served cold in a sack for you to savor. So dainty to eat, no muss, no fuss. An ideal snack for all of us. Crisp, tender, and tasty with a bit of spice. Buy one now. Taste how nice. Snack bar clerks will knock themselves silly, speeding your order for a real chili dilly.
So here's a cool businessy question. So James Bracantes, and pardon me if I mispronounced that, what's the average attendance at a Mahoning weekend show? I go to lots of shows by myself, so that's 1 to a car, but sometimes I see 7 or 8 people huddled around a van down by a river. So it can be hard to estimate by counting cars. 100 people, 200, 500. What's a typical crowd? What number is considered a success?
Yeah, he said it's hard to figure it out. It's impossible to figure out. We always go with the mentality, and have for many years now, that every car is going to, on average, have 2 people in it. There's going to be those people that come with 1. There's going to be those people that come with 5, you know, but on average, each car is going to have 2 people in it. And, you know, people who come to the Mahoning regularly, they see it. Our weekday shows are not the crowds that we pull for weekend shows. We've had many that have done very, very well. But traditionally, those weekends are more than half sold out. I don't think we had anything that was less than more than half sold out. Our sellout this year was 700 tickets. And eventually we went to a little bit less than that, at least when we had big overnight potential. Although I find when we do the overnights, I don't know if you guys see this too, but when we do the overnights, I feel like we have less vehicles. I think more people do come in groups when they stay overnight, you know, decide to do the overnight. I guess they're coming together, less stuff to have to bring in multiple cars, whatever the case is. And most of the action gets forced to the back. So it's tough to say because each night is a different overhead as well. So like you look at a Tuesday, which is designed to have a low overhead, and what we need to do to be quote unquote successful is a much lower number or amount. But I mean, to show behind the curtain a little bit, we don't really look at ticket sales and can't really look at ticket sales as a part of the quote unquote success of the business, because a lot of that comes in the other departments, as most people know, the concession, the merchandise, things like that. A lot of the time, if the ticket sales can cover the overhead of the show, being the film costs, the shipping, the payroll, things like that, that's a huge win. So like Jeff said earlier, how we run the business transforms every single year, but how we gauge our success certainly has shifted. The bar has raised, but I think we still have the same mentality where if we're giving an amazing experience, even if the numbers aren't huge, that's what we gauge it on. And there certainly hasn't been a night where we haven't given that experience.
So at the tail end of the first run era at the Mahoning, what was a good night? Like if you're showing Guardians of the Galaxy, that's the one that often comes up when we're talking about the transition period between first run and retro at the drive-in, our drive-in. What was a good night back then?
Well, Jeff tells the stories of the big sellouts at the Mahoning, but only my experience at the Mahoning was lighter crowds than we pull now. So, but Jeff can speak on it. I'm sure certain titles, I'm sure, demolished regardless of where it was playing.
Yes, in all the years I've been there since 2001, when this is just first run now. So in other words, once we hit 2014, we're done with first run. But from 2001 through 2013, the biggest franchise I had was Pirates of the Caribbean. That sold out, the first one, the second one, they all did fantastic. I was sending 10 grand to the bank a night. I mean, it was crazy. The place was packed. That's the best franchise that we had when we were first run. And like Virgil's talking about, when I bought the business in 2014, we were still first run, but, average 4 or 5 cars maybe on the weekends, 15, maybe 20. It was terrible because, and I won't get into the history of it too much, but the people that had the business before I had it kind of ran it into the ground. They did some things with fundraising that just weren't too cool, and the place kind of got a bit of a bad reputation because of it. And so, it went from selling out for Pirates of the Caribbean to, you have a good film like Guardians of the Galaxy that went crazy everywhere else. And we had 15 cars, 20 cars in the weekend, 5 during the week. It was terrible. It was just downright terrible. And it just happened to be that about that time is when they were not going to put out film on 35 millimeter anymore. Then there was a choice to be made. So we don't have to go through that again because we all know what choice we made. But it was bad at the end. It was bad. And I like to think if I would have gotten it before 2014, that never would have, the first run wouldn't have dried up. But in a way, I'm glad it did because it led to this, and this is just fantastic. When you're showing the same film that everybody else is showing, what's the difference? Oh, this place has air conditioning. This doesn't. Oh, this is a drive-in. Oh, this is an indoor theater. Yeah, you pick on where you want to go, but you're seeing the same film. There's nothing outstanding about it. When you play stuff that nobody else is playing, you're choosing your own path. I always wanted to do that, and we finally got the chance to do it thanks to digital. If digital never would have come along, who knows? We might still be first run.
Yeah.
But that's what happened, and it worked to our advantage, and the people have loved it ever since.
It allowed us to get creative. And they say in a lot of creative mediums, that sometimes the greatness comes when your back is against the wall. And our backs were certainly against the wall. Our industry was forcing us up against a wall. And, to have that decision to be made is really what made the Mahoning what it is. We had the passion without a doubt. And we certainly would still have that passion running first run. But I think going retro allowed us to shine in a lot of ways and allowed us to grow in a lot of ways that make us stand out. And I can guarantee that if we were running first run, it would be a lot harder to do that. But destiny, we have to look at our whole situation as a destined thing, because there were so many elements in play that led to this, and so many decisions that seemed off the cuff that are so groundbreaking now in their choices. Even the choice to stick with 35, it's like that was a total necessity choice. Like, we knew we weren't getting rid of the 35, but we also knew we didn't have the money for the digital. So
right,
again, back against the wall sometimes births greatness.
Yes, absolutely.
Gene Beretta asks, do each of you have a favorite season since you became retro, or even a very favorite night from all of those years? For me, they all kind of blur. I mean, that first retro season was so exciting because it was so fresh and different. And I was just a customer finding this home away from home 6 hours away from where I lived every weekend, and just being so excited to see old movies on the big screen on film and old trailers and all that kind of stuff so regularly. For me, it was like a once or twice a year thing, and then suddenly I could do it every weekend if I wanted to. And that was really kind of cool, seeing the whole thing find its initial footing.
Definitely those early years. I mean, there's elements of each season that I love, and a lot of people that have been with us for the years and seen our growth, they may miss elements that we had, even something as simple as the barrel fire. We would do the barrel fire every single night because we had very few customers, and it was very easy for us to allow that without worry that it would be a negative thing.
You weren't smoking out the people in the tents that were parked behind the barrel fire.
Yeah, totally. It was
just what it became
rare.
after a while.
Yeah, it was very rare that we didn't have them, but I look at our growth as a real shift. We used to have a very clubhouse mentality, a Little Rascals mentality in those early years. And the Little Rascals mentality certainly is still with us, but we were able to grow and form a structure and a model and thrive to do that and not be okay with just good enough. Like, because we've become the Mahoning, we've been able to motivate each other to raise the bar and continue to push to make elements of the place that much better. So I think the best season that we've had is this year, because it led up to all the mistakes that we've made and all the lessons we learned pushed us into this year, and certainly the best year will be next year.
Of course, you always look forward to the next year as being the best out of all of them. And I agree. It's hard to pick out one favorite year since 2014 because they've all been growing years, as I call it. And so I think, next year should be even better. And I love all the seasons we've had so far. They've all been great in one way or another.
Yeah, so true. As far as events go, we could go down that rabbit hole for days. I do love some of our annuals that we do. We look forward to them every single year. Zombie Fest, Camp Blood, VHS Fest. It really is the marker throughout the calendar where you're like, all right, we're getting there. There's so much. Definitely those early Kevin Smith events, even though they were somewhat of a bust, was perfectly in the wheelhouse. Like that, I always look at those early Kevin Smith events as Jeff allowing me to take a swing, even when it wasn't guaranteed that it would be a big return or something like that. It's that mentality of planting the seed and the mentality of eventually it'll grow into something. I remember talking to Jeff year one about Lebowski Fest and comparing what I imagined Kevin Smith Fest being, where Lebowski Fest started in somebody's basement where they would all get together and quote the movie and come dressed up in character. And now it's a huge annual worldwide fan event. And the Mahoning has certainly taken that mentality and carried it over with a lot of the events that we do. So, and we know it this year for Kevin Smith Fest. If we can make those dreams come true, it's going to be the best Kevin Smith Fest and day. Something that people across the country will be wanting to come to.
It's like I said, the people that we have around us at the drive-in. You hire somebody who's really into it, who really wants to be a part of the team, and then you see where they excel and you see what they're good at. And since I can say Virgil was the first person that came along after I got the business, he was so personable and so loved to talk to everybody. First thing I thought was, boy, he would be a good film agent. He would be a good film booker. So I thought, now I'm going to see if he wants to do that. So I told Virgil, I said, hey, how would you like to be the film agent for the drive-in? He's like, yeah, I'll try it, and he's perfect at it. He's great at it. So that's really all it is seeing what a person enjoys doing, see what they're really into, and they will achieve, they will excel. It's a matter of putting them in the right place. So Virgil's a great film agent. And he's a great partner. He loves walking around and pressing the palms. And I can't walk around as much as I used to. So, that's what it is. It's just finding what the talent is in each person. And then, like Virgil said, let them take a swing, see what they can do.
Yeah. We saw that this year with Mark and the Monkeys event, and we talked about it at our last event. We're gonna put that ball again in his court for another fan event this year. Just that's a tease for anybody. So, but yeah, it's really exciting, the stuff that we have coming up and the team that we've built. I say it, the structure that we have here, the ability to work together is the make or break mentality, and the fact that we are all able to motivate and elevate each other in each department is key.
Get yourself ready for a mean double bill. If coffee don't get you, JD will. Coffee and JD's Revenge. The baddest pair of heavyweights to ever hit the screen with a 1-2 punch like you've never seen. Coffee, she's sweet, black, and hot. Mess with her and you're playing with fire. JD's Revenge, where a dead man's soul comes back from the grave to seek out his killer and the vengeance he craves. Coffee'll cream ya, JD'll scream ya, so take a taste of double trouble. See Coffee and JD's Revenge, doing it together to do it to you. Pam Grier, Flynn Turman, and Lou Gossett Jr. in Coffee and JD's Revenge. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
Will Neon Rockin' Chip says, what's the status on the property? Has there been any progress on purchasing the land?
That's a good one. It's like this. The owner right now would rather lease it to us just because it's his preference. And I get along great with the owner. We get along fantastic. He knows he has to sell it one day. And, you know, the thing with Green Skies, I don't want to drag all that up again, but I don't think that will happen again. I think the next chance we have at it will be when he is actually ready. And I can say it's getting closer all the time. I can see him starting to give a little bit just because he's 10 years older than I am, you know, and he wants to leave something behind for his family. And we know his family is not interested in the drive-in, so he would rather leave them some money. I mean, who wouldn't? So as far as purchasing the drive-in, yes, I think it's going to happen. Whether it's this year or next year, I can't really say. That's up to the owner. He's kind of a private individual. I'm not going to mention his name. Most people know it anyway, but the point is he's a great guy. I enjoy leasing from him, and I'm just waiting for him to be ready to let go. That's about all there is to it.
So speaking, this is an older question that I just unearthed right now. Gene Beretta says, it's a two-part question. Number one, when are you going to take responsibility for building on a sacred Indian burial ground? And two, if the Mahoning became a reality series, who would spend the most time in the confessional booth? So you see, the problem we have at the Mahoning is that we only moved the headstones. We thought, the headstones, they'll go and pay respects to grandma somewhere else. And you know, they didn't.
We did always say there's a spirit around the drive-in.
Yeah, we never thought it'd be a problem if we dug a pool in the back. No, so if the Mahoning was a reality series, who would spend the most time in the confessional booth? I don't know how to answer that.
Me, for sure. Jeff, our go-to this year is Jeff would gauge my face and be like, well, are you the asshole? Or are you everybody's friend?
Yeah, exactly. I'll look at him sometime when he comes walking in and I'll say, so, Virgil, what are you today? What do you look like? What do you look like today?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough sometimes. Being the front man, you know, and having the responsibility of having the questions and all go through me, or the requests go through me. When things don't work out or don't happen for somebody, it's really easy to turn to me and be like, why didn't you make that happen? But it is a reality series, you know. There's so many endless instances, moments, adventures, little tiffs, you know, but nothing ever major. It's truly become second nature to what we do.
We talk about that, you know, if this was a reality series, or when we write the book, there are so many things where it's just like, you know, reality TV is based upon the notion that we have this thing we have to do. It's impossible. There's no way that we can do it. But by the end of that hour, my God, we made it happen. That is what it's like there all the time. Something comes up. Yeah. Oh no, it's raining really heavy and the snack bar is flooding. Better move that space heater. Or the print. There's no way we can get a print. We can't get a print. What? A print? Shut up. I didn't ask for a print. We've got a print. That kind of stuff happens all the time. That would make for wonderful TV drama. And I'm happy on the nights where there would be nothing that would make great TV drama. But if somebody wanted to spend all their time shooting miking us all and shooting all the time and editing it forever, probably would get a wonderful 25 minutes a week out of that place.
This would be an honest reality show because none of this is scripted. We're reacting to exactly what happens the moment it happens. So believe me, it's real.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You could say reality TV. That's always in quotes. It is so heavily manipulated most of the time and engineered and things like that. And for us, it's just, a neighbor will roll in on a riding lawnmower to come and buy popcorn.
Yes.
Which does happen frequently, and it's great. I always say, it's wonderful. It's the best kind of customer. They don't take up a parking space. They buy our most high profit items, and then they take their garbage with them. Yes, please.
You couldn't script that.
Yeah, it's great. And we like that. Honestly, what a great compliment to our snack bar staff that one of our neighbors wants to come to our place and get his dinner and leave. That's great.
Yeah, regularly. Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Or you have somebody ride in on a motorized unicycle. That happened once.
People who showed up, they were like, this guy was riding down the highway on that. You got to be kidding me.
Yeah. It's like I came from Allentown. It's never boring. It's very, very, very rarely boring at the theater. There is always laughs and insanity and wonderful magic moments every night we're open.
Oh, yes.
Zachariah Smith says, do 3D movies work at a drive-in? My understanding is no, but I bow to your expertise.
We just went to a 3D screening. Mark, you weren't there, were you?
No, I missed that show.
The week after, which was one of our most listened to episodes last year, we all went to the 24-hour-thon. This year, the show after was the 3D, what did he call it? 3 Dimensions of Fear.
Or 3 Dimensions of Terror, something like that.
Or something like that. It was Jaws 3D. It was Friday the 13th 3D. And it was Amityville 3D. And it was amazing. As they explained before the screening, Exhumed Films has patented and created a new type of 3D glasses that work without a silver screen. And Jeff can attest to this. Back in the day, and most people will remember this from their childhoods, the screens in the theaters were actually silver. They would give off a kind of a shimmery shine. And a lot of the reason for the success of 3D was the ability to bounce light off of the screen. Without that, it's really hard to pull off 3D. But don't ask me to get into the technology. Well, I guess we'll save that for when Harry comes on eventually. But yeah, somehow he made it work. But traditional 3D, Jeff, that's something I've always heard is difficult to make work at a drive-in.
Yes, it's practically impossible just because the white screen does not have the reflectivity of a silver screen. And you would think that would be opposite. You would think, oh, a silver screen is darker. It's not, but for 3D, no, you need that silver screen. I don't know what chemical it is that allows it to work. I don't know the name of it, but you really do have to have one. If you try 3D on a white screen, you're looking and you're like, well, yeah, I sort of see it, but not really.
Yeah.
So if Harry wouldn't have come up with this special lens that he has, why, it wouldn't work at all. So I'm glad that he came up with that. At least we can see some things in 3D.
Yeah, and it would be amazing to do. But another big thing with 3D as well is the control of light. It needs a lot of light. The light needs to be controlled. And that's something that's way more difficult at a drive-in versus an indoor because you have the elements, you have the distance, you have so many things that go against you when it comes to the brightness of the picture.
Yeah, right. Drizzle, fog, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So, but Harry has certainly brought up the idea of trying it. I think the only way we could pull it off is like half capacity and having nobody beyond the snack stand. They certainly wouldn't get the effect beyond the snack stand, but boy, oh boy, did it work in the indoor. The 3D gimmicky 80s effects, I'm a sucker for that, man. Just like, they find every reason to put something in your face. It's pretty phenomenal.
One of my drive-in stories that I don't think I've told on here, and I'll save for a separate instance, is when the 80s 3D explosion happened, which 3D was always a reaction by the movie studios to a threat. In the 50s, it was TV, and in the 80s, it was cable and home video. And right around 83, when you had that explosion of 3D movies again, I saw Space Hunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, with Peter Strauss and Molly Ringwald and Michael Ironside at my local indoor theater in 3D. And I had always read about 3D, but I'd never experienced it until that year. So I loved it. And it was going to play at my local drive-in. And I was super excited at the idea of seeing a 3D movie on a screen that big. And we got there and were super disappointed to find out they were showing it flat. And I've never known a drive-in to show a 3D movie as long as I've been paying attention anywhere. When I did my interview on the podcast with Steve Bissett, he said he remembered going to a drive-in in California and seeing a movie in 3D, but it was the red-blue anaglyph 3D, and he said it really didn't work very well because still you just need that super bright image for it to work. I would love for 3D at a drive-in to work, but like I said, I don't know of any precedent where it has.
Yeah, placement is key too. Like that was the big thing when we got to the theater was everybody's like, oh, you got to sit middle center, to get the best effect, and at the drive-in, certainly more than at an indoor house, you never know where you're going to be.
Right.
In fact, the center is probably its center front is probably the most impossible place to be, being that our building is there.
It's always my understanding that for good 3D, you wanted to be back a little bit so that you could see the entire screen. You weren't like watching a tennis match or anything like that, so that you could get the effect of the depth and all of that. That's kind of what I try to do when I see anything in 3D now.
Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The management of this drive-in theater is happy to announce you can enjoy your favorite form of movie entertainment regardless of rain. No longer will it be necessary to let rain spoil your fun. Now you can keep your windshield clear and dry with a drizzle guard. Simply attach it to your windshield, and in a jiffy you're enjoying the movie without constantly running your windshield wipers. A drizzle guard will save you gasoline and wear and tear on your battery. After the show is over, all you do is take off your drizzle guard, roll it up, and it's ready to be used again, just like an umbrella. So next time it rains, don't sizzle in a drizzle. Get yourself a drizzle guard and enjoy the show. Drizzle guards are on sale now at the concession center.
So there is one last question. Austin Berkey says simply, off-season plans?
Hell yeah, off-season plans. Honestly, it's so exciting this time of year where the ideas really start to feel like they're becoming a reality. Some of the connections that we made this year, we're able to actually reach out and develop those connections and friendships. And the Mahoning is known for fan events, and there's endless fandoms for us to tap into. But again, our focus, at least for this year, is to try to really go for drive-in culture specific, for a lack of a better term, gods, and goddesses, people who are really responsible and are looked at as godfathers of the drive-in and the drive-in experience and the movies that we love or call for when it comes to the drive-in. So I don't know. Do you guys do anything specifically in the off season? I mean, certainly finding a side gig, making a little extra hustle money.
That's kind of mine right now. It's so now what do I do?
Yeah, there's a great one, Mark. It's a shame that you're not like my neighbor down here, but this might be what I actually do in the off season. My local record shop does a lot of online shilling, whether it's through Discogs or eBay or Facebook Marketplace, and they're literally looking for somebody to track, sell, and ship out records.
That would be like a dream gig for me. If
no brainer.
That's the hard thing for me. Not spilling the beans on my vocational woes, but it's just like I think, what I do at the drive-in rather well. But then it's like, well, what do I do when we're not doing that? How can I apply those skills to somebody else who wants to pay me arguably really far too much to do it? And that's what I'm trying to find. It's like, I would love to, all the things I love, movies, video stores, record stores are all mostly dying breeds. So they're not high paying gigs, and they're not, like clamoring for people to do that. So that's kind of my gig right now is trying to find out. I mean, I'm running the Patreon for us. That will never stop. And that will, if anything, really see an increase in activity during our off season. That's where the action is for the Mahoning fans in the off season. And recording this and editing this podcast and getting more guests for the podcast and all that. Our podcasts, by the way, folks, you'll see an increase in new content there too. We recorded a ton of guest recordings, actually pre-season this year, back in February, March, that I'm still releasing. But we're going to get a lot more guests. We'll get a lot more staff members to join us on these to talk about drive-ins and season and memories and favorite films and all that. But in other words, I'm going to try to go to the movies as much as I can, watch as much of my gigantic pile of unwatched physical media as I can, and find somebody who'll pay me.
Heck yeah.
I would say my off season, the two most important things about my off season is catching up with my job at the radio station and meeting with Virgil once a week to talk about next year. That's my biggest thing.
That's right. Plotting and scheming. It's really endless. And even now, we normally take our little break until we get to Thanksgiving, and then we'll start getting into our meetings. But people are coming out of the woodwork already. As soon as they saw the season was over, they're like, hey, can we make this partnership happen? Can we make this happen? And another great thing is, almost instantly we start digging into the suggestion box, and the Patreon has certainly given us a ton of really great suggestions. And again, we're running into a situation where we're not going to have enough room for all the cool stuff to do, but that's never a problem. If anything, we got some time. Exactly.
And what we can't squeeze in the upcoming year, we'll get it in 2024. Virgil has all these things down in a computer, all the ideas and all the suggestions that you folks have done. And we really don't forget any of it. It's just a matter of finding a space for it. And if not this year, next year. Yeah.
The focus in the off season really is to kind of get the mental stability back, and kind of get the much needed physical rest from running the theater all year, or at least half the year.
Yeah.
I mean, it really never stops. Certainly for the three of us, the job never ends, even though the season's not running. Even when it comes to things happening within our industry and stuff like that, we're constantly going back and forth. And obviously the upkeep of equipment as well. That's a biggie. The hardest thing to do in the season is to work on anything, because we're open more days than we're not. So to be able to have the time to be able to take a little bit of a step back and focus on things.
I agree 100%.
Well, that was a nice little run of questions there. I mean, the fans, they never, ever, ever disappoint. And we're so excited that we were able to get Jeff back on the podcast. Hopefully now that our schedules are a little more flexible with the off season and we don't have to be on the lot all the time, hopefully we can have you regularly. People are always asking whenever you're not on the podcast, they're like, when's Jeff coming back?
What keeps me away mostly is the radio station, because I've got a responsibility here I keep the radio station job basically to back up the drive-in in case anything should happen. Okay, I got a couple of bucks put away, to take care of some stuff or something like that. So the reason I'm not here when we're, like you said, during the season is because I've got to pay bills. I got, which eases off now that we're closed, but I got to pay bills. I got to make sure I'm up there at a certain time. And during the day, I'm here at the radio station, and I really got to concentrate on this. But now that we're closed for the season, yes, I should be back much more often.
Awesome. We're looking forward to it. As always, we can't urge you guys enough to jump over to the Patreon. We have amazing virtual screenings on a regular basis. So it's like a way of getting the Mahoning dose at home. So A great way to keep your finger on the pulse of what we're doing, our plans, all that fun stuff. And we can't say it enough. In the off season, it really is another beast. And we are more than going to share all the happenings on the social medias, the Patreon, all that stuff. So just don't forget about us. Keep us in your heart, your weekly run, and we'll make it worth your while. So on that note, I think, Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night and God bless you.